Welcome to a short tour of Granada, followed by a visit to the Alhambra, which highlights Spain's Moorish influence. We started from our cruise in Malaga and took a bus to Granada, which only took us about an hour to get there. We were treated to terrific views of the Andalusian countryside, which include lots of olive groves and the fabulous white cities. As we got closer to Granada, we were able to spot the snow-covered Sierra Nevada mountains. The entire area reminded me a lot of California. As we arrived in the city, we went first to a church that honored the patron saint of the city. While there, we were admiring the stonework in the sidewalks, which was evidently hand-laid. I don't know how they would have done that any other way. From there, we walked up the tree-lined street to a square with a Baroque stone fountain in the middle of it. We continued up the main street and into a pedestrian-only shopping area. Once again, we were very impressed with how clean everything was. We ended up in another square, this time with the statue of Neptune on the fountain, and the plaza was surrounded with lots of places to eat and have snacks, so we had a little break, and we decided to stop for churros. Next, we were off to the cathedral, but we went through a narrow alley called the Artisan Market, and it was just full of silk and all kinds of goods. There seemed to be a mix of really authentic, locally produced items, as well as the tourist knockoffs. But the silk in particular was really gorgeous, and it was even hanging from the roof above the corridor. We finally arrive at Cathedral Square and the Cathedral of Granada, which is well known for its dome. And the interior was spectacular as a Renaissance cathedral. It had a golden white interior, and it's known for its stained glass dome chapel. As we came out of the chapel, we encountered a breakdancing exhibition. As you look over on the left side, you'll see some guys practicing their moves before they hit the main stage. Well, it was time for a lunch break, so we headed back down the main drag near the church that we first visited and had lunch at the restaurant Paco Martin. Now, this was the entire tour group, and the dining room looked quite empty, but shortly thereafter, 2 more tour groups showed up, and it filled up quickly. We headed back to the bus and started up the very, very steep road to the Alhambra, which was the real highlight of this trip. Just be forewarned, there is lots of walking on this tour, so we parked the bus down below and then headed up a very beautiful tree-lined street from the parking lot passing below the fortified walls. It was quite warm, but the trees provided some air conditioning for us and kept us in the shade at least on the way up. And it was on the way up. There was a significant hill to climb to get to the fortifications themselves. We finally arrive at the gate to the Alhambra. The Alhambra is a palace and a fortress complex that was built in the mid-13th century during the Nasrid dynasty, and it was the last Muslim dynasty on the Iberian Peninsula. And these are the French cannons, and you can see what a strategic view they had for anybody trying to attack the palace. We're going to visit the palace of Charles V. It was built, unlike the rest of the Alhambra, which was built by the Nasrid dynasty. This was built in the late 15th century after the city was reconquered by the Christians. The palace is noted for its circular patio, which is unique for its time. It is a significant Renaissance building which really stands in contrast to the older Islamic art and architecture of the Alhambra. Now today it has the Alhambra Museum and the Fine Arts Museum of Granada. This was our tour guide, and he was essential to our understanding of what we saw here, and I highly recommend that you try to get a guided tour of the Alhambra. Next, we head into the Patio de Los Comares, which is known as the Court of the Myrtles. This rectangular courtyard is named after the dense hedges of myrtle bushes that line both sides of the reflective pond. The pond was interesting because that served as not only as decoration, but as a functional cooling system, air conditioning, if you will. At the north end of the courtyard is the Grand Tower, which houses the Hall of Ambassadors, and it's the largest room in the Alhambra and the place where the Sultan held his court. Before we go into the Sultan's room itself, we're going to look a little bit at the decoration of these arches outside. They really showcase the mathematical and geometrical precision synonymous with Islamic art and architecture. They have intricate arabesques, and calligraphic inscriptions are on the plasterwork of the arches and the walls, most of which have blessings, poems, or praises to the sultans. We'll now go into the main hall, which is the grand reception room where the Sultan's throne was located, and he received and entertained ambassadors and important guests here. The lower part of the walls is covered with ceramic tiles, and the middle with ornate plasterwork. As we look up, it's particularly famous for its extraordinary domed ceiling. The ceiling represents the seven heavens of the Islamic cosmos with intricate and symbolic design work, with over 8,000 individual pieces of wood. The Patio of the Lions is the main courtyard of the Palace of the Lions, which was the private quarters of the royal family, and really represents the pinnacle of Nasrid art. The palace itself is known for its impressive architecture, and particularly the ceiling. This has a breathtaking honeycomb or stalactite vault, and the architectural design is typical in Islamic architecture. In the ceiling of the Hall of the Two Sisters, there's a complex dome with over 5,000 tiny compartments, all carved and assembled to create a sense of being beneath the heavens. So we head outside away from the elaborate interiors, and we were quite surprised to see the condition of the outside of the building. We next take the exit to the gardens, and we see manicured hedges and flowers throughout the garden. The focal point of the gardens is the Pont of the Bartal, a large pool of water that is overlooked by the building itself. So this provided a beautiful viewing point for the folks in the palace. The gardens stretch out along the slope below the palace, and they follow the traditional Islamic style of arranging gardens in terraces. There are also several buildings, including houses that were once residence for the nobility. There are also the remains of the Palacio del Partal, a series of gardens, and several other structures. And here, once again, is our wonderful tour guide. So now we begin the long walk to the hill opposite the Alhambra, which is the Gardens of the Master. These gardens and palace were built as a summer palace for the Nasrid rulers in the 13th century. There's a little theater here that was built much later that is used for performances during the Granada Festival of Music and Dance. The gardens are designed according to the traditional Islamic concept of paradise gardens, and they feature abundant water, shade, and very lush vegetation, not to mention some wonderful views. We now get a look at the Cypress of the Sultana, and has a romantic legend that dates back to the era of the Nasrid dynasty. According to the tale, a beautiful sultana used to meet her Christian lover under this tree. Their forbidden love was supposedly discovered, and in a fit of jealousy and rage, the Sultan ordered the beheading of the knight. Here you can see the Alhambra on the opposite hill, and see the terrace gardens, as well as a beautiful view of Granada and the mountains beyond. Finish up at the summer palace itself and see a long pool framed by flower beds, fountains, colonnades, and pavilions. Unfortunately, we did not get to go into the building itself. So that's it for our tour of the Alhambra, and we make the long walk back down the hill to the bus parking lot, still enjoying the beautiful vegetation and gardens along the way. So back on the bus, it's time to head back to Malaga. It's about an hour. But on the way down from the Alhambra, we got terrific views of the city and a great view of the Sierra Nevada mountains, still with snow on them in April. And as before, we were treated to great views of olive groves and white cities along the way. Once we're back on the ship, it's then time to bid farewell to Malaga as we sail away.